All right, welcome to another deep dive, where today we're diving into a story that's so wild. It feels like something straight out of, I don't know, like House of Cards or something.
It's definitely got that stranger than fiction vibe to it, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, we're talking about South Korea's president, Yoon Suk Yeol, who was, impeached just last month. And today, well, he was taken into custody,
Yeah.
arrested.
Yeah, the speed at which this whole thing is unfolded is really remarkable.
Totally. So we've been digging through a ton of news articles and analyses on this, trying to, understand how we got here. And let me tell you, there's a lot to unpack.
It's definitely a complex situation with, layers upon layers of political intrigue.
Absolutely. So to make sure we're all on the same page, let's rewind back to the beginning of December, December 3rd to be exact, when Yoon made that, well, pretty shocking decision to declare martial law.
Yeah, that was definitely a turning point. I mean, officially, UN justified it by saying there were threats from, North Korean communist forces.
Right, right. And also some vague anti-state forces.
Yeah, exactly. Anti-state forces, very vague. It was essentially him using, the military to lock down the National Assembly.
And that's where things really started to heat up.
Yeah, because the opposition lawmakers, they weren't buying it. They saw right through it.
Yeah, they were basically like, come on, you're just trying to block legislation that you don't like.
Exactly. It was pretty transparent. And they made their feelings known in a pretty dramatic fashion.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it. They literally broke through police barricades to vote against the martial law declaration. Can you imagine?
It's kind of crazy when you think about it. It's this incredibly powerful image of, lawmakers literally fighting for their right to do their jobs.
To govern. Right.
Exactly, to govern. And it raises these really important questions about how much power a president should have during a, supposed crisis.
Right. And who gets to decide when a crisis even exists. So Yoon, I mean, he might have thought he was making a power play, showing his strength. But I think it's safe to say it backfired.
Oh, big time. The opposition saw it as a blatant attempt to just grab power, and they didn't hesitate to start impeachment proceedings.
And this all happened pretty quickly, right? Like within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, December 14th, they launched the impeachment proceedings.
And the charge was rebellion, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a pretty serious charge in South Korea, right?
Oh, yeah, it's as serious as it gets. Because a president, they can't just claim immunity from charges of rebellion. So Yoon's suddenly facing some very, very serious potential consequences. We're talking potentially the death penalty, serious.
Wow. Okay, so while the Constitutional Court, they were getting ready to decide whether to actually remove him permanently, Yoon's powers were suspended, right?
Right, immediately. So he's kind of in this limbo state, waiting for the court's decision.
Which I'm guessing wasn't exactly a relaxing wait.
Oh, not at all. Because remember the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials? They were watching this whole thing unfold very, very closely.
The CIO.
Exactly, the
Yeah.
CIO. And they wanted to know, was this martial law declaration, was this a legitimate act of governance? Or was this just Yoon trying to seize power?
So they summon him for questioning.
Exactly. And knowing Yoon, I don't think he was too keen on cooperating.
Yeah, I can't imagine he was just eager to answer their questions.
Not at all. He basically refused to play ball, which only made the CIO more suspicious.
Okay, so what did they do? Did they, try to reason with him, issue a public statement? What happened?
Well, they took a pretty bold step.
Yeah.
They decided to go for it. On January 3rd, they made an attempt to detain him, at his residence.
Wait, hold on. They just showed up and were like, all right, you're coming with
It
us.
sounds crazy, right? But yeah, it didn't exactly go smoothly.
Yeah, I bet.
Because the Presidential Security Service, the guys whose job it is to protect Yoon, well, they physically blocked the CIO investigators.
Oh, wow. So it was a literal standoff.
It was. They basically argued that even though Yoon was technically suspended, they were still obligated to protect him.
Interesting. So round one goes to the Presidential Security Service, I guess. What happened next? Did the CIO just give up?
Oh, no, not a chance. They regrouped. They kind of analyzed what went wrong.
Yeah.
And they started planning their next move.
Okay, but while all this is going on, I imagine Yoon wasn't exactly sitting around twiddling his thumbs, was he?
You're absolutely right. He wasn't. He used this time while he was holed up in his residence, to record a video message.
And what did he say in the video?
Oh, it was pretty dramatic. He basically declared that the law of the country has collapsed and that he was a champion of justice, being targeted by this corrupt CIO investigation.
It's like he was trying to rally support, frame himself as the victim.
Exactly. It was a very calculated move.
So the stage is set for round 2.
It was. And round 2 arrived on January 15th when the CIO came back. And this time, they meant business.
All right, I got to hear about this. So what happened? How did they get past the security this time?
Picture this. Over 3,000 police officers show up at the presidential compound.
Wait, 3,000? That seems a bit excessive, doesn't it? I mean, were they expecting, like, an armed rebellion?
Hard to say what they were expecting, but, they were definitely sending a message. And get this, they actually used ladders to climb over buses that the security detail had used to barricade the compound.
Wow. Okay, so they breached the perimeter. What happened then?
Well, surprisingly, there wasn't a lot of resistance this time. It seems like, maybe Yuko-wan or someone close to him realized that, fighting back would only make things worse.
So they took him into custody. Where did they take him? And what exactly are the charges?
They took him to the CIO headquarters in Gwacheon, where they're going to question him about, well, remember those rebellion charges we talked about earlier? They're investigating whether his martial law declaration actually qualifies as rebellion.
Wow. I mean, it's incredible to think that the president, the most powerful person in South Korea, is now, a suspect in a rebellion investigation.
It's pretty wild. But, there's another piece to this puzzle that we can't forget about, the impeachment trial.
Right, because the Constitutional Court still has to decide whether to actually remove him from office.
Exactly. And just to add to the drama, Yoon, he actually refused to attend the initial hearing, which was on January 14th.
Right.
But the court's going to proceed with or without him.
So we have a president in custody facing extremely serious charges, and the court's deciding his fate. It's like something out of a movie.
It really is. And this is just the beginning. Because, this isn't just about Yoon. His actions and what's happened since have really sent shockwaves throughout South Korea.
Yeah, and that's what I want to explore next. How are people in South Korea reacting? What are the potential consequences, both politically and for the country as a whole? But we'll dive into all that after the break.
All right, so we're back. And we're diving deeper into this whole Yoon Suk Yeol situation.
Yeah, and we've kind of laid out, the timeline of events, but I'm really curious to explore, the bigger picture here. How are people in South Korea reacting to all of this? Is the country, kind of united behind this, or are there deep divisions?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a mixed bag. There's no, single unified response. It's pretty divided, actually.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Given how dramatic this whole thing is. So I imagine, Yoon's supporters are pretty outraged, right?
Oh, totally. They see this as, a total witch hunt, purely politically motivated. And they're demanding, his immediate release. There have been protests popping up, near his residence, people holding signs and chanting slogans. It's pretty intense.
Wow. Okay, so that's one side of it. But what about, the people who were opposed to Yoon's policies, before all of this went down? Are they, celebrating?
It's not so, black and white. It's more complicated than that. I mean, some people definitely feel a sense of relief, finally he's being held accountable for what they see as, a real abuse of power.
Right.
But there are also a lot of people who are worried, worried about what this means to the country, worried about, instability. They're calling for calm, urging people to respect the legal process.
Yeah, because, the country's future is kind of hanging in the balance here, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really delicate situation.
So how is the government handling all of this?
Well, Deputy Prime Minister Choi Sang-mok, he's currently the acting leader.
Right.
He's trying to, carefully navigate this whole crisis. He's appealing for peace, urging everyone to stay calm. He's also, really pushing for both law enforcement and the Presidential Security Service to avoid any kind of escalation of conflict.
Because the last thing anyone needs right now is, violence on top of all the political turmoil. So beyond just the political drama, I'm wondering about, the real world impact. How is this affecting the average person in South Korea? Are there, economic consequences?
Yeah. There have definitely been some ripples.
Like what?
Well, for example, the South Korean one, its value dipped pretty quickly after Yoon's arrest. And we've also seen bond yields go up, specifically on 10-year government bonds.
Okay, can you break that down for me a little bit? I mean, I know those are significant economic indicators, but what do they actually mean for, people's everyday lives?
Okay, so a weaker one means that, imported goods, they get more expensive. So we're talking everything from electronics to food.
Gotcha.
And then the rising bond yields that can make it harder and more expensive for businesses to, borrow money, which can then lead to, slower economic growth and job losses and stuff like that.
So even though it might not be super obvious right now, there's this ripple effect. This political earthquake is kind of shaking the economy a bit.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And what about South Korea's relationships with other countries? I imagine their allies are watching this whole thing unfold with a bit of anxiety, right?
Totally. I mean,
Right.
South Korea is a major player in the region, right?
Yeah.
Both economically and strategically. So their allies are definitely concerned about stability and continuity, especially given the, always present tensions with North Korea.
Yeah, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely complicates things. Analysts are trying to figure out what this means for South Korea's foreign policy moving forward. Will the country kind of turn inward? Will we see shifts in alliances? There are a lot of questions up in the air right now.
So it really could reshape, South Korea's entire position on the world stage.
Yeah, exactly. This is, way bigger than just some domestic political drama. The impact could be felt far beyond South Korea's borders.
Okay, so circling back to the domestic side of things, what should we be looking for in the coming days and weeks? What are the key developments to keep an eye on?
Well, the most immediate thing is, the legal proceedings. So the CIO, they're building their case against Yoon, and the Constitutional Court is continuing with the impeachment trial.
So we've got these two tracks running in parallel. What happens if the court decides to actually remove Yoon?
In that case, they'd have to hold new elections within 60 days. So that would be a whole new chapter for South Korean politics.
Okay, but hypothetically, let's say the court decides to reinstate him. Could he just, walk back into the Blue House and pretend nothing happened?
Well, technically, yes. But realistically, it would be incredibly difficult for him to actually govern. I mean, he's deeply divided the nation. His reputation is, not great right now. He'd face opposition from, everyone, even his own party. His legitimacy would be constantly challenged.
Yeah, so regardless of the court's decision, it seems like Yoon's political career is, well, let's just say it's taken a hit.
That's putting it mildly. This whole thing has really exposed some deep cracks in South Korean society and, raised some serious questions about the strength of their political system. It's a reminder that even in a democracy that seems, really stable, things can change really quickly.
And that leads to a really important question. What does this whole situation tell us about the fragility of democracy? Even in countries that seem, on the surface, pretty solid.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And it's a question that goes way beyond this specific case. It forces us to think about power, governance, all those big ideas.
Because on paper, South Korea seems like, a model democracy. It's developed, it's got a strong economy, they've had peaceful transitions of power in the past. It seems like a system that should work.
Exactly. And yet here we are. And I think what we're seeing is that even in systems that seem really strong, things can fall apart if leaders start overstepping their boundaries.
Like with Yoon trying to use martial law to basically, get what he wanted.
Yeah, it was a gamble that backfired big time. And it kind of started this whole chain reaction.
So what does this mean for South Korea moving forward? What does the future hold?
I think the Constitutional Court's decision is going to be a major turning point. I mean, if they remove Yoon, South Korea is going to have to choose a new leader and figure out, what direction they want to go in.
And if he's reinstated?
Well, even then, things are going to be different. Yoon would be leading a nation that's, really divided. The political landscape would be completely changed.
So either way, it seems like South Korea is in for a period of, some real uncertainty.
Yeah, for sure. But, maybe this is also an opportunity. Maybe this is a chance for South Korea to really reaffirm their commitment to democracy, to strengthen their institutions, to, find a way forward that truly reflects what the people want.
It's a powerful reminder that democracy is not a given. It's something you have to constantly work at, You have to be engaged. You have to be willing to defend it.
Absolutely. And that's a lesson that goes far beyond South Korea. It's something we all need to think about no matter where we live.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with something to think about. What does this situation in South Korea tell you about the state of democracy in your own country?
Yeah, think about it. Talk about it with, your friends, your family, and most importantly, do something. Because the future democracy, it really depends on all of us.
That's it for our deep dive today. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. Okay, so we're back and ready to, wrap up our deep dive into this whole situation with Yoon Suk Yeol.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From that initial martial law declaration, this standoff at his residence. We've talked about the potential consequences for South Korea, both domestically and internationally. It's been quite a ride.
It really has. But before we, sign off, I want to go back to something you said earlier, that question you posed about what this whole situation reveals about the fragility of democracy. It really stuck with me.
Yeah, it's a question that, kind of goes beyond the headlines, the specifics of this case. It makes us think about those big ideas, those fundamental questions about power and governance and, the rule of law.
Because you look at South Korea, and on the surface, it seems like, they've got it all figured out. Developed nation, strong economy, history of peaceful transitions of power. You'd think it was a system that was, built to last.
Right. But I think what we're seeing here, what's happening right now, is a pretty stark reminder that even in those systems that seem really strong, things can start to unravel, especially when leaders, try to overreach to push the boundaries of their authority.
Yeah, Yoon's decision to declare martial law, it's like he was trying to force his agenda through, and it just totally backfired. And in a way, it's what led to, his downfall.
Exactly. It's a reminder that checks and balances are important. The separation of powers, the need for leaders to respect the democratic process, even when it's not going their way, that's crucial.
It also makes you realize how important it is for citizens to be, engaged, to be active participants in a democracy. We've seen that in South Korea, right? People speaking out, protesting, holding their leaders accountable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Democracy isn't just about, voting every few years. It's about active citizenship, a free press, a willingness to challenge those in power when they need to be challenged.
So looking ahead, what do you think? What's next for South Korea? How does a country, move on, heal after something like this?
Well, the Constitutional Court's decision is going to be huge, right?
Yeah.
If Yoon's removed from office, South Korea is going to have to choose a new leader, figure out a new path forward.
And what if he's reinstated?
Even then, the landscape's going to be different. Yoon's going to be leading a nation that's divided because of what he did.
Mm-hmm.
His legitimacy would be questioned constantly. It'd be really tough to govern effectively.
Yeah. So it seems like, no matter what happens, there's going to be a period of uncertainty for South Korea.
For sure. But, maybe this is also an opportunity, right? A chance for South Korea to sort of reaffirm their commitment to those democratic values, to, maybe strengthen their institutions. Maybe this is how they find a way forward that truly reflects, what the people want.
I like that. It's a reminder that democracy isn't like, a finished product. It's more like a process, a journey, something that you constantly have to work at.
Yeah, it's about being vigilant, being engaged, and being willing to stand up and defend it when it's threatened.
And that's a message that, it's relevant everywhere, not just in South Korea. It's a message for all of us.
Absolutely. The fragility of democracy, it's a global concern. And what's happening in South Korea, it's a good reminder of, what's at stake.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question, something to think about. What does this whole situation in South Korea tell you about the state of democracy, in your own country?
Think about it, talk about it with your friends, with your family, and, most importantly, do something. Because the future of democracy, it really does depend on all of us being active, being engaged.
That's all for our deep dive today. We'll be back soon with another topic to explore. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.